They never saw him coming, and they certainly never imagined he would rise again. That first night, on a deserted street corner just before dawn, he lay curled against a frigid brick wall, skin trembling, hope dwindling, spirit all but broken. Passers-by barely noticed him. Just another lost soul in a city that seemed to swallow the vulnerable and spit out their crushed remains. But hidden beneath the dirt on his cheeks and the weariness in his eyes was a power so extraordinary that, when finally unleashed, it would shake the very foundations of those who had tried to destroy him. He was known simply as Malcolm to those who spoke to him at all. In another time, only a year prior, he had been a husband, a father, an optimistic and hard-working man. He was the kind of person who never turned a blind eye to anyone in need. He offered his last dollar to any stranded traveler, or brought a pot of soup to a neighbor he barely knew. Somehow, the swirl of cynicism and selfishness that often cloaked the city never quite latched onto him. Yet the same trusting heart that made him remarkable also made him vulnerable. Slowly, they chipped away at everything he owned. First his dignity, then his livelihood, then his marriage, and finally his very identity. Rumors spread at his workplace. An anonymous accusation, a single piece of fabricated evidence. He lost his job. Friends he had for over a decade turned cold and distant. "I'm sorry, Malcolm, but we can't be involved," they'd say. "You know how this looks." He felt a silent earthquake shaking up his world, upending everything he once trusted. At first, he believed that justice would prevail, that truth would set him free. But the very system he trusted was the one that pinned false allegations against him. Through it all, Malcolm held on to the only lifeline he had left. His family, his wife Carolyn, tried to stand by him, but the whispers in her ear grew louder every day. "He's not who you think he is. He lied to you. He's a fraud." Perhaps it was the unrelenting pressure of the mortgage or the fear of losing social standing. Maybe it was the sheer fatigue of trying to fight a larger, nameless force. One day, Malcolm came home to an emptied house. Furniture gone, closets bare, and a single note that said she was taking their daughter, Olivia, to live with her parents out of state, out of his reach for good. Something inside him snapped that day. He tried to maintain composure. He walked the cold hallways of the police station, hoping for some clarity, only to be met with dismissive shrugs and vague references to an ongoing investigation. Disoriented, he sought out attorneys. But once they heard fraud, embezzlement, and pending charges, they wanted 10 times their usual fees money didn't have. Bank accounts were frozen. His car was repossessed. The disorientation turned into desperation. He spent a month couch surfing at acquaintances' apartments until their sense of obligation wore out. One cold April morning, he found a single black garbage bag on his friend's doorstep. Inside was all that remained of his once comfortable life. A couple of shirts, worn-out jeans, and a toothbrush. His friend's final text message read, "I'm sorry. This is too risky. You have to go." That was it. Out on the street. Nowhere to turn. The city's tall buildings felt like mocking sentinels, overshadowing his new reality of sleeping on benches and rummaging for scraps. Night after night, as Malcolm struggled to find a safe corner or a warm vent to sleep beside, he tried to make sense of the puzzle. Why him? Who orchestrated this downfall? Anger flickered in his eyes whenever he thought about it. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted to reclaim his life. If he could just gather evidence, if he could just prove who was responsible for planning those damning accusations, maybe, just maybe, he could get back to Olivia. But they had tried to destroy him completely, these faceless conspirators. Little did they know that Malcolm had a hidden gift, a rare ability he had never once flaunted, never used his advantage. He had been blessed or cursed from an early age with memories so vivid it bordered on the photographic. Numbers, facts, faces, words from documents he read once in passing. He could recall them with uncanny clarity. It made him a meticulous worker, but also made him the target of bullies who found his intellect threatening. As an adult, he had learned to keep it under wraps, offering only glimpses of his skill in the service of helping others. Now, with nothing left to lose, Malcolm realized that his carefully concealed talent might be the very key to his redemption. Night after night, in the meager glow of street lamps. He combed his mind for every detail he'd encountered in his former job. Every ledger number, every contract, every signature, every suspicious conversation that passed by his ears. He recalled the CFO's mannerisms at staff meetings, the HR director's cryptic remarks in the hallway, the CFO's assistant's whisper phone calls. He remembered everything. All he lacked was a plan, a single chance to gather real evidence in the physical world that would validate the trove of knowledge in his head. On the streets, paranoia began to grip him. He suspected he was being followed. He would see the same black SUV idling near the soup kitchen where he lined up for meals, or parked a block away from the library he occasionally visited to send emails, though no one ever replied. He felt eyes on in the crowd, a presence that turned away the moment he tried to lock a gaze. The people behind this were far-reaching, he realized. Whatever they were hiding must be enormous. But what do they gain by destroying my life? He wondered, heart pounding. He found an ally by chance in a rundown shelter on the outskirts of the city. Her name was Deborah, a volunteer nurse who spent her weekends doing medical checkups for those without homes. She was new to the city, passionate about social justice, and had no preconceptions about Malcolm's alleged transgressions. She saw him not as a criminal, but as a man in desperate need of help. On her lunch break, she'd bring him soup and clean water. Over time, he confided bits of his story to her. The job, the false accusations, the lost family. She listened with sympathy, but it was only when he showcased his ability by reciting entire pages from her old medical textbooks, word for word, including references to obscure diseases, that she realized he wasn't just another unfortunate soul spinning tall tales. He was telling the truth. Deborah offered to hide him in her small attic for a couple of nights. It was cramped, but it was safe. More importantly, it was warm, a place where he could finally stretch out on something other than cold concrete. There, he began organizing his thoughts, creating detailed outlines from memory of every suspicious transaction at his old company, Banning and Co-Investments. He listed names, dates, amounts, and even the color-coded highlights he remembered on certain documents. Deborah was stunned by the thoroughness of his recall. She had never believed in photographic memory until she saw the outlines he wrote from memory, so precise that they looked like they'd been copied from official ledgers. She pledged to help him find legal assistance, an honest lawyer who might take his case pro bono. Yet even as a flicker of hope warmed the corners of Malcolm's despair, he knew it wouldn't be so simple. People high up, people with money and power, were invested in keeping him discredited and invisible. He had to remain vigilant, trust no one but Deborah. Late one night, while the wind howled outside and Deborah was in an overnight shift at the hospital, Malcolm heard commotion downstairs. Footsteps, then whispering voices. Panic shot through him like a bolt of electricity. They found me. He had no idea who they were. Maybe private investigators, maybe hired thugs. He gathered his notes, quickly stuffed them into a small backpack, and pressed himself against the attic door to listen. He could make out at least two male voices, rummaging through Deborah's living room, opening drawers, flipping through papers. A few minutes later, the footsteps approached the attic stairs. Malcolm held his breath. If they catch me, they'll destroy the last evidence I have. The attic door creaked open, sending a sliver of pale light across the dusty floor. Malcolm shrunk into the shadows, heart hammering in his chest. One man stepped up into the attic, scanning around with flashlight. Its beam danced across old boxes, holiday decorations, an antique rocking chair. Malcolm remained perfectly still, flattened against the floor behind a heavy trunk, grateful for the shadows that cloaked him. He willed himself not to so much as twitch. After an agonizing moment, the man turned and headed back down. Malcolm heard one of them hiss, "He's not here," before they clomped down the stairs and out the front door. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave, followed by a deep sense of dread. This is getting too dangerous. He couldn't stay here any longer, or Deborah would pay the price. When Deborah returned early in the morning, Malcolm relayed the night's events in hushed urgency. She didn't ask him to leave, but he insisted. He wouldn't let her life be ruined because of him. With trembling hands, she gave him a small sum of money, her own emergency fund. "You need a safe place," she said. tears threatening to spill over. And you need someone who will believe you, someone who can use your memories, your evidence, to fix this. The next few days passed in a blur for Malcolm. He avoided shelters, suspecting those might be the first places his pursuers would check. He moved from alley to alley, sometimes napping during daylight hours in the back row of quiet libraries, awakening to find librarians gently nudging him to leave if he had nowhere else to go. Driven by desperation, he found a lead, an investigative journalist named Avery Torres. She was known for exposing corrupt politicians and corporate executives. She had no allegiance to the city's old money families who pulled the strings behind the scenes. With Deborah's help, Malcolm managed to slip a note under Avery's office door. The note read, "You want a story that will blow this town open? I have everything you need. They framed me, destroyed my life, but I remember it all. Help me and I'll help you." To his surprise, Avery reached out through an encrypted email address. She was intrigued. She wanted to meet, but she also warned him, "If this is true, you are in danger. You need to be certain you have incontrovertible evidence." Malcolm was beyond certain. The question was whether he could prove it to someone else. They arranged a covert meeting at a 24-hour diner off the highway. Malcolm sat in a corner booth, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, scanning every face that entered. After nearly an hour, she appeared, a tall, confident woman with sharp eyes. She slid into the booth opposite him, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Malcolm wasted no time, launching into a detailed account of the fraudulent activities he had witnessed at Banning and Co-Investments. He cited the exact file numbers, the hidden accounts, the email communications that referred to hush money transactions. Avery scribbled furiously in her notebook. Occasionally, she'd widen her eyes, then scribble more. Over coffee refills, Malcolm explained how the CFO, Russell Banning, had used him as a scapegoat, forging Malcolm's name on documents that funneled funds out client accounts and into shell corporations. Once the scheme was set, they pinned the blame entirely on Malcolm, effectively crushing him under the weight of the allegations. Avery listened, enthralled yet cautious. "I need documentation," she told him. "A memory like yours is incredible, but we need physical proof to publish a story that'll stick. Otherwise, they'll dismiss you as a disgruntled ex-employee making baseless claims." He told her about the CFO's assistant, Marcella, who likely had digital backups on her work laptop. Malcolm recalled lines from a conversation he had overheard between Marcella and another executive, hinting that the data was stashed on a personal USB drive. If they could get that drive, they have enough proof to bring down the entire ring of corruption. But accessing Banning and Co. headquarters was like walking straight into the lion's den. High-tech security, cameras in every hallway, plus a guard station. Malcolm would be recognized instantly if he tried to enter. "We need another angle," Avery said. "Marcella might be the one who can help us. If she's also a victim in some way, perhaps coerced or threatened to keep quiet, she might be open to blowing the whistle." It took days of carefully orchestrated phone calls from Avery to Marcella, each call more urgent than the last, to convince the assistant to meet. Marcella finally agreed to a hush rendezvous late at night in a parking garage near the financial district. The tension in the air was suffocating. Malcolm stood behind a concrete pillar, while Avery spoke to Marcella, outlining what they knew. Marcella's face was a portrait of anxiety. She fiddled with her keychain, glancing around the vacant garage. Her voice shook. "Russell threatened me. He said if I ever said a word, I'd be implicated. And worse. He mentioned my family." She swallowed hard. "But I can't live with this on my conscience anymore. People have lost their livelihoods because of this scheme. Malcolm's life. They ruined it just to save their own skin." She handed Avery a small USB drive and gave detailed instructions. "Inside are scanned files and emails. Every transaction, every password, every signature. I've been gathering them for months in case I needed leverage. This is enough to bring down the entire operation, if you can stay alive long enough to publish." Avery thanked her solemnly, promising to protect her identity. As Marcella turned to leave, she noticed Malcolm stepping out from behind the pillar. Their eyes locked, his gaze filled with gratitude. She recognized him from a year ago, when he was a rising star at the company, always polite, always helpful. Their shared look spoke volumes, an unspoken apology from her and a silent appreciation from him. But even with the USB drive in hand, the battle was far from won. Banning and Co. was a juggernaut. Powerful board members, influence in the local government, and an array of highly paid lawyers ready to discredit any attack. Avery and Malcolm needed a plan to release the evidence in a way that couldn't be suppressed. While Avery began drafting the exposé, preparing it for multiple outlets simultaneously, Malcolm found himself cornered once again, this time by the relentless black SUV. One evening, as he walked down a darkened street, the SUV screeched to a stop just inches away. Two men jumped out, grabbed him by the arms, and dragged him into an alley. They pinned him against the wall, fists pressed into his ribcage. A tall figure, face partially concealed by a shadow, stepped forward. Malcolm recognized the voice instantly. Russell Banning. "You just couldn't stay down, could you?" he hissed. "You had to stir up trouble. Well, you won't get far. You're still the prime suspect in an embezzlement case. Nothing you say will ever hold weight in court. And if you think some self-righteous journalist can save you, you're dead wrong." Malcolm struggled against the brute force pinning him, but it was no use. Russell's men threw hard punches into Malcolm's gut, leaving him wheezing, close to blacking out. Through pain-clouded vision, he could make out Russell's sneer. "We warned you," he said. "We tried to keep you quiet. You forced our hand." They left him curled in agony, bruised and bleeding, as the SUV roared away. Gasping for air, Malcolm managed to stagger back to an abandoned storefront he'd been using for shelter. He felt the ache of broken ribs, the sting of raw cuts on his face, and the pounding fear in his heart. Will I even survive to see justice done? Fortunately, Deborah and Avery came to his aid. Deborah cleaned his wounds with trembling hands, tears falling as she realized the severity of his injuries. Avery's voice shook with anger. "We need to escalate this now. We have enough to blow the lid off this story, and every hour we wait, they're hunting for us." In the early morning hours, Avery initiated her plan. She had multiple contingencies: a pre-scheduled email blast of major news outlets, digital backups stored on cloud servers in different countries, a timed social media campaign with pre-written posts. All of it was set to release the incriminating files. She also prepared to publish the in-depth story of how Russell Banning and his cronies orchestrated the sabotage of an innocent man, complete with direct quotes from Marcella's testimony. As dawn approached, a wave of adrenaline coursed through Malcolm, even as his body screamed in pain. He realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every unsuspecting person who had invested their life savings into Banning and Co., every employee who had lost a job or been coerced into silence. And yes, it was about his family. He wanted them to know the truth. He imagined Olivia's face, the confusion and hurt when her mother whisked her away, the unspoken questions. Where's Daddy? Why isn't he with us anymore? He wanted her to know he never abandoned her. He wanted Carolyn to see that she had been deceived. Most of all, he wanted them all to realize that the man they tried to destroy still stood, battered but unbroken. When the story finally went live, it spread like wildfire. Within minutes of publication, social media lit up with outrage and disbelief. Links to Avery's exposé circulated in emails, text messages, and forums. Local TV stations picked it up, then national networks took interest. By midday, calls were flooding into the district attorney's office, demanding an investigation. Malcolm watched it all unfold from the safety of Deborah's small apartment, tears welling in his eyes. He saw the retweets, the comments, the reposts. People he once considered friends, some of whom had turned their backs on him, were now championing his cause on social media, praising his courage, condemning Banning and Co. "We were wrong about Malcolm," they wrote. "He deserves justice." In the following days, the Attorney General announced a formal probe into Banning, and a federal task force was assembled to review the USB drive's contents. Russell Banning made a public statement declaring his innocence, but the mountain of evidence was staggering. One by one, the board members began resigning. A flurry of arrests took place, including Russell himself, charged with fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and assault. The black SUV was impounded. The men who beat Malcolm were soon identified and taken into custody. But the most poignant moment for Malcolm wasn't watching Russell's perp walk on the evening news. It was a message he received from Carolyn a week later. She had seen the news coverage, recognized the truth, and was consumed by guilt. She wrote that she had been misled by the barrage of allegations and that her family pressured her to leave for the sake of stability. She apologized profusely. Most importantly, she sent a photograph of Olivia, grinning at the camera, clutching a small doll. "She misses you," Carolyn wrote. "Please, when you're ready, come see us." Malcolm wept openly upon reading that note, decades of withheld sobs surfacing in raw, shaking gasps. Deborah held him, letting him release every ounce of pain and relief that swelled inside him. Despite the triumph of the public expose, Malcolm knew the road to normalcy would be long. He still had a battered body that needed care, still needed to clear his formal record, though it was quickly being dropped now that the real criminals were exposed. Yet in that moment of unfiltered emotion, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. The city's public turned him into a symbol of resilience. Some called him a hero for fighting back against impossible odds. Others were simply fascinated by his photographic memory, calling it a gift from God, a superpower. Offers for legal support and financial assistance started rolling in. Pro bono lawyers reached out to help expunge his record. Journalists clamored for interviews, wanting exclusive rights to the story of the man who came back from the dead to topple a powerful empire. Local community leaders spoke about rethinking how they treat the homeless, how one overlooked stranger might be hiding a greatness no one could imagine. Malcolm's first priority, however, was to see his daughter. A month after the story broke, with his name all but cleared, he boarded a bus to Carolyn's parents' house. He stepped off in a quiet suburban neighborhood lined with maple trees. His heart pounded as he walked toward the house, each step both exhilarating and terrifying. The door opened, and there was Carolyn, eyes brimmed with tears, unable to speak. Olivia peeked out from behind her mother's leg. The little girl's eyes lit up, and she ran into Malcolm's open arms, burying her face in his shoulder. He inhaled the soft scent of her hair, trembling with joy. They couldn't destroy this, he thought. They tried, but they failed. Over the next few weeks, he quietly rebuilt his relationship with his family. He also assisted authorities in clarifying the full extent of the fraud at Banning and Co. Meanwhile, Avery's expose was nominated for National Journalism Awards. She visited Malcolm often, giving him updates on the ongoing trials and the changing public opinion. "You become a symbol of courage," she told him one afternoon over coffee. "People are saying if you can stand back up after everything you've been through, maybe there's hope for us all." Malcolm took this newfound celebrity status humbly. He wasn't seeking fame, only justice. One day, he ventured back into the city, this time not as a destitute outcast, but as a man on a mission. He walked to a local community center that provided resources for homeless individuals. He remembered the shame he felt standing in line for free meals, the hopelessness of sleeping under an overpass. He offered volunteer services. With his reorganized life, he found a modest job as a data analyst for a small nonprofit, ironically, a position that valued his meticulous mind more than any corporate entity ever had. He then used his earnings to help fund the center's programs, assisting others who were battling homelessness. Those at the center who recognized him were in awe. "You're the guy from the news," they whispered, "the one with the memory." He smiled and nodded. In quiet conversations, he'd encourage them, reminding them that a single stroke of bad luck or the malicious actions of others could bring any person to rock bottom. "But you can rise again," he'd say. "No matter what they throw at you, if you keep fighting, you can rise again." No one was more stunned by Malcolm's resurgence than the people who once dismissed him as guilty without question. His old neighbors gushed apologies. The bank that repossessed his car offered compensation. The ex-colleagues who refused to stand by him pleaded for forgiveness. For Malcolm, the hardest part was learning to forgive. He wrestled with anger, even hatred, for the betrayal he endured. But eventually, he realized holding on to that darkness only gave power to those who harmed him. To truly reclaim his life, he had to let go of the bitterness. When Russell Banning's trial began, the courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for position, and the public tuned into every update. Malcolm stood as a key witness, his memory delivering precise accounts of phone calls, meetings, and even the exact words Russell had used to threaten him in that alley. Russell glared at Malcolm with venom in his eyes, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for a short time before delivering a guilty verdict on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The day of sentencing, Malcolm chose not to attend. He found no satisfaction in seeing another man go to prison, even one who had tried to destroy him. Instead, he spent the day with Olivia, taking her to a nearby park. He watched her chase butterflies, giggle on the swings, and find joy in the simplest wonders. He didn't need to witness Russell's downfall. The real victory was reclaiming his life and reuniting with his daughter. Months passed, and the city underwent subtle changes. Investigations into other corrupt businesses took root, spurred by the unstoppable momentum of Avery's exposé. People looked twice at the homeless on the street, wondering if each person might hold a secret story or a hidden power. The phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover," became a local catchphrase once more, not just a tired cliché, but a genuine reminder that appearances could deceive in the most dramatic ways. One breezy afternoon, Deborah and Avery stopped by Malcolm's modest new apartment. It was clean, bright, furnished with a small couch and a second-hand table. On the wall, he'd pinned up a collage of photographs. Him and Olivia at the park, Deborah holding a volunteer badge, Avery accepting her journalism award, and even a snapshot of Marcella, smiling shyly. He called it his wall of gratitude. They sat down for tea, the three of them exchanging updates, reminiscing about how far they'd come since that fateful meeting in the diner. Deborah's eyes glowed with pride as she looked at Malcolm. "It's still surreal," she said softly. "You were on the brink of losing everything, and in many ways you did, but you showed us all what real strength looks like." Avery added, "In my line of work, you see so many stories that end in tragedy. You've given people hope, Malcolm. The city is different because of you. You've touched hearts." A gentle smile formed on Malcolm's face. "I couldn't have done it alone," he replied, voice trembling with gratitude. "You both saved me, and I promise I'll keep fighting for those who are still where I once was, left out in the cold, feeling invisible." He thought back to the moment they dragged him into that alley, the hopelessness he felt when he lost Carolyn and Olivia, the night sleeping on the streets with no guarantee he'd live to see the morning. From that darkness, he had risen. No matter how thoroughly they tried to destroy his life, they couldn't annihilate his spirit or his memory. That gift, which once made him a prime target, had also become his greatest weapon. Even after the city's uproar subsided, the memory of Malcolm's plight remained an unyielding testament to the potential hidden within every marginalized individual. People began whispering about him as a living legend, a homeless man turned hero, the man with the memory that toppled a giant. As for Malcolm, he tried to remain humble. He continued volunteering, helping out in community centers, quietly supporting legal funds for wrongfully accused victims, and raising his daughter with renewed vigor. He told Olivia stories at bedtime, stories of knights who faced dragons, dwarfed by size but never by spirit, and how they won not just with swords but with truth and honor. Olivia would drift asleep dreaming of a world where goodness prevailed. Life pressed forward in its messy, complicated way, but Malcolm no longer feared the shadows lurking around every corner. He felt no further need to hide his abilities, no shame in unveiling the extraordinary capacity of his mind. He understood now. When used for good, a unique gift, even one as intangible as memory, could be a mighty force for justice. Looking back, every painful detour, every betrayal, every bruise, every frozen night had led him here. And as he walked along the city streets that once swallowed him in despair, passers-by turned and recognized him. Some offered kind words, others a respectful nod. There, beneath the tall skyscrapers and neon signs, Malcolm finally felt a deep sense of peace. The conspirators had tried with all their might to ruin him, but from the ashes of that cruel plan, he had risen, unstoppable and resolute. And in the end, what they never counted on was a quiet power buried within him, a power that left everyone speechless, himself included.